see.
Now it's showing up in the bottom.
I'm trying. Oh, okay. You think it's Google wants us to pay?
No.
All right. Well, anyway, please move this window away. I tried to. Anyway, we'll have to deal with it. I could unshare and try rebooting it, but we're not running out of time. So
yeah.
Later down the line and say, friend, stop by unexpectedly.
What's going on?
All right. I think we're going to get started. If you could all please mute yourselves and turn your cameras off since this is being recorded. We're going to have everyone write their questions into the chat. And so if you're not familiar with the chat, it's at the bottom of your screen. You click on the chat icon and it opens up the box on the side. So we're asking people to write where they're from. And then if you have any questions during the presentation, you can write the questions into the chat and we will address them after the presentation. Okay. So welcome, my name is Debbie Merriam and I am the chair of the Reference Garden Committee for the American Conifer Society. And I'm very pleased that Bayard Cutting Arboretum is doing this presentation because they are our most recent addition to the Reference Garden program. And they are also the recipients of the 2020 ACS Iseli grant. So congratulations on that, folks. So, and there are three of them presenting today. We have Nelson Sterner, he's the executive director, Kevin Weeks, the landscape curator, and Joy Arden, the GIS specialist. So thank you so much for doing this presentation. And I'm going to ask everyone to please mute yourselves and go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. Well, we are all so excited to share the Arboretum with everybody. The last time the ACS was here, I've been here for 9 years. They were here about 10 years ago. I think the Northeast Regional Meeting was at the Arboretum. So, you know, obviously we welcome you back as soon as possible to see our great collection of trees. And most recently, as Debbie mentioned, we did receive the Iseli grant, of which we put in our new dwarf conifer collection. Kevin will be talking about that. And, you know, we're very, very excited to share the Arboretum with you, as I said before. So I'm going to go through my program. Kevin's going to present the middle of the program and Joy will present the last part of the program. So this is just a quick view of the manor house at the Arboretum. The Bayard Cutting Arboretum was the summer home of William Bayard Cutting. He built the house in 1886. So we're going to kind of look through a little bit of what we have and how we got there. Mr. Cutting was a lawyer. He graduated from Columbia Law School at the age of 19 with a degree in law. He never practiced law. He had the good fortune of having lots of money from his father. So he really focused on philanthropic ideas. He met Olivia Cutting and married her. They had 4 children. And he bought this property in the late 1800s with the idea to build a summer home in 1886. So Mr. Cutting was a founding member of the New York Botanic Garden board. So he had a strong interest in conifers. And so he worked with the New York Botanic Garden to develop their collection also. This is just an aerial view of the 30s of what the Arboretum used to look like. And this area in the upper right actually now is, and I'm going to go through it, but this was the vegetable garden. This area in the middle is actually now the new Pinetum. But the focus of the day actually was the old Pinetum where Mr. Cutting collected conifers from around the world from the noted collectors of the day of Ernest Wilson and Sargent. Beatrice Ferrand actually worked on the estate after Mr. Cutting died in 1912. And when he developed the estate, keep in mind that back in the day, you didn't go to the local wholesale nursery and buy plants, but you had to buy things very, very small. And this gives you an idea of how the Arboretum started. Everything was started very, very small. And then this is just a quick view of a publication, the Landscape Quarterly, which was in 1937, which showcased the Arboretum. And what's exciting about this publication, which we have in our files, is that many of the trees are still here. Unfortunately, in the late 80s, Hurricane Gloria came through and actually wiped out a very high percentage of the Arboretum. Almost over 2,000 trees were decimated in the year during Hurricane Gloria. But this is Mrs. Cutting. Mr. Cutting died in 1912. Olivia Cutting lived on the estate with Mrs. Cutting to 1954. But Mrs. Cutting and Olivia decided to give the Arboretum to the state in 1934. They had the right to stay here until they choose to left. Like I said, was in the 54. But Mrs. Cutting had a view that the Arboretum should be a public space. And she was pretty precise about that she called it an oasis of quiet and beauty. And she also, interestingly, asked that active sports not be allowed here. So we don't have skateboarding, baseball, things like that. This was a place for you to come, relax, and use the estate as she did throughout her lifetime. So she gave the keys ceremonially to the state in about 1954, and this is her given the keys. So this is just a quick view of what the Arboretum is about. And again, it's 691 acres, so it's kind of hard to tell it all in 45 minutes. But this is what we're about now. We have about 12 major collections of plants: the Old Pinetum, Hollywalk, Pinetum Extension, CSA Farm, New Pinetum, Conifer Garden, Woodland. And I'm just going to highlight a few of these collections. We have over 2 miles of waterfront, a great lawn, great oak collections, and I'll quickly look at some of those. One of the things we did here, we are the only CSA farm, community-sponsored agriculture farm in New York State parks. And this is what it looks like when Mr. Cutting was here. He had a dairy farm. And so we came in and we decided to change this. Of course, we didn't have a dairy farm when it was turned over to the state, but we did open up a CSA farm. So now we have over 100 different families come here in the summer to get vegetables. And the CSA farm now is 100% organic, but it's really focused on education and organic farming. We also developed a new garden called the Four Seasons Garden. And this was the site of the old lilac collection. And when the Cuttings were here, they had a collection of lilacs. We were going to replant it with lilacs, but the lilacs typically do not hold up well on Long Island due to different ailments. So we moved forward. We hired Lyndon Miller, who's a noted garden designer in New York, who did a lot of Central Park and Princeton and places like that. And Lyndon worked with Rhonda Brands to design a new collection for the Four Seasons Garden. And this is what it looks like today. And what I wanted to point out quickly, and I don't have much time, but back here is where my arrow is a Chamaecyparis cripsii. And when we designed this garden, we tried to utilize the existing plants that were there. And when we designed the garden, here's that Chamaecyparis cripsii, which now is a focal point of the garden amongst other plantings. We also have a holly collection. Basically, this is what it used to look like. It was a garden that was planted in the 70s, but was not maintained well. So hence everything grew together. You couldn't see left or right as you came through the garden. We hired a different designer to design this garden. We wanted to create a garden that provided you access to the hollies, where you could walk through the hollies and see the hollies. So we greatly expanded this collection. We added a maze garden of different types of hedging hollies. And this is what it looked like as we planted it. And this is what the garden looks like today. So it's kind of more of a walk-through garden. And you can now actually see the old Pinetum through the holly collection. We also developed the Westbrook Wall Garden. This is what it looked like. It was overgrown with miscanthus and other plants. You could not see the original Olmsted designed wall. Once we took everything out, this is what it looked like in the 30s when the Cuttings lived here. This is what the original wall looked like. This is what it looked like after we took all the plants out. The only thing we kept in this garden was this Franklinia. And this is what the garden looks like, designed by Wendy Fazy. And we purposely chose a different designer because we didn't want a cookie cutter look like we had in the Four Seasons garden. So Wendy designed a very, very colorful garden. And this is what it looks like today. So it's a mixed border with conifers and perennials that have a wonderful view from the manor house. We also had a woodland garden. Mrs. Cutting loved this garden, and she used to walk through it daily. When I came in 9 years ago, it was overrun with bamboo because it hadn't been maintained. So this is just a quick slide of what it looked like prior. We ripped out all the bamboo. We had to put in protection. And this is what it looks like today. So now it's a mixed, it's actually more of a traditional woodland garden with a bit of a flair for the drama, depending on our key woodland gardener, Karen, is actually quite bodacious in her plant selection. We also have Breezy Island, which was the home of Mrs. Cutting's tea house. This is the group of actual worker bees at the Arboretum, but Mrs. Cutting would take tea at Breezy Island. This is what it looked like when I got here. It was covered with bamboo. Once again, the same bamboo that we had in the woodland garden. And this is what it looked like because the tea house was gone. So basically, this is what Breezy Island looked like. And this is what it looks like today. We borrowed a lot of the elements of the Olmsted look of the old tea house with the arched openings and the black locust structure. And Oak Park is, when Mr. Cutting bought the property, Frederick Law Olmsted designed the landscape around the manor house and the entrance, and Olmsted's design really focused on Oak Park because there were very large black oaks here when Mr. Cutting moved here, and he built the house around Oak Park. So today, here are some of the original oaks. They're still here. We're really expanding our oak collection more with instead of northern oaks, we're using southern oaks like southern live oak and things like that. But now we have 32 different species of oaks, over 198 oaks in Oak Park. Moving forward, one of the great things about the Arboretum is that we, by doing all these projects, we actually, our attendance has grown from 100,000 people to 450,000 people last year. And to accommodate that, we actually have designed a new parking lot, which will be built this year, combined with a new visitor center that will have handicapped accessibility and ways that people can access the collection from the visitor center. So that's my timer. I'll quickly look at a few of the cool plants that we had. Have actually Joe Cesarini, which was a local hybridizer, gave the Arboretum a collection of really cool plants in the 70s. And this was one of the grafted Hinoki cypresses that Joe gave us. This base is about 14 inches in diameter right now. We have a Ginkgo biloba procumbens. And we have a wonderful Asuja canadensis argentea pendula, which is about 50 feet across. It's one of the largest in the United States. We also have one of the original trees is an A.B. pinsapo glauca, which this is the sergeant's hemlock here with this A.B. pinsapo, which is still here. And we have a wonderful Algerian fir. Again, diameter, DBH, probably about 4 feet in diameter. DBH right now, about 100 feet tall. Again, one of the original trees. And we have lots and lots of bald cypress here. Wonderful pseudolarix, or the golden larch, which unfortunately isn't used enough, but it's a super duper tree planted in the 50s. And Cunninghamia, we have wonderful Cunninghamia lanceolata glaucos that have leaves from floor to ceiling, which is actually uncommon to have this. And Kevin will hand off and start talking about some of our new conifer collections.
All right, thank you, Nelson.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, stop share. There we go. Okay. Oh, lots of chats. There we go.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you, Nelson. I'm Kevin Weeks. I'm the landscape curator at Bayard Cutting Arboretum, and I'm going to talk about our new conifer collections and plant introductions. I like to present this in the context of the history that Nelson was talking about, because I think one of the things that makes Bayard Cutting Arboretum so special is being able to view these new introductions next to the age and scale of our original accessions. 2020 was the year of the conifer at BCA. In addition to being recognized as a reference garden, we were awarded the Iseli Memorial Grant. So first, I'm going to talk about our new slow-growing conifer garden. The grant was used to design and install this collection. Every year, BCA hosts a horticultural internship program. Each intern is asked to work on an independent project in their area of interest. This year, we were lucky to have Jessica O'Callahan. She was a student from New York Botanical Gardens School of Professional Horticulture, and Jessica chose to work on this project. She was very active in every part of the process. She helped us with the grant writing right down to the installation. And I'm happy to say that Jessica is no longer an intern, but she is an employee with Bayard Cutting Arboretum today. So this was the site before the garden was installed. Obviously, heavy edits were done. The large weeping white pine became a very important foundation plant in the new garden. We installed 2 adjacent borders that led to a bench, which gave you a view of the entire collection. Chamaecyparis piscifera dominated the area. It was untended, very impressive, large plants, but it was untended for a very long time and became quite messy. Rhonda Brands, she was our consulting designer on this project. She helped us to figure out some of the more difficult design challenges in the area. The primary problem was working together a shaded woodland with a full sun conifer garden. She described this area as the Chamaecyparis Cathedral. Rhonda can be very dramatic, and that's why we love her. Pruning up the Chamaecyparis and exposing the beautiful bark and branching tied together this entire area. This is one side of the finished garden, and this is the opposite side of the finished garden. You walk down that grass pathway and it leads you to a bench where you can sit and enjoy a view of both sides of the garden. As part of the ACS grant, we had access to Iseli Nursery's incredible inventory, and we also had a substantial discount on the material. This is Nelson. That's right, that's Nelson, our executive director, up there in the truck unloading. And the other photos are the material before planting. I'd like to talk about each and every plant that we put into this collection, but I certainly don't have time to, but I'll discuss some of our favorites. Of course, under the canopy of the Chamaecyparis piscifera sclerosa, we included quite a number of Chamaecyparis piscifera cultivars. My favorite being Blue Moon, which is all the way to the right. Cryptomeria japonica Dinger, Pinus contorta, Taylor's contorta. This is a really interesting plant, and the habit of it against the very erect trunks of the Chamaecyparis piscifera is stunning. Abies Procera glauca. This plant is repeated in the garden, and it's a very important design element. Abies Coriana cyberpearl, Picea abies push, and Picea sichensis Bethum sunlight. This tree wasn't something that we picked out. It was recommended from Iseli Nursery. Jonathan Moore, who helped us tremendously, recommended it. It was collected from the Queen Charlotte Islands and given to Iseli in 1981. It's a true collector's plant and extremely difficult to propagate and difficult to find in the trade. It's a slow-growing golden spruce with bluish interior needles. It has an extremely interesting backstory that's documented in the book, The Golden Spruce. Once again, I certainly don't have time to tell you the whole story of this plant, but I encourage everybody to Google it. If you like trees with a backstory to it, besides the horticulture, this plant has a fascinating history. So this is the finished product, either side of the garden. The design isn't entirely finished in the garden. Plant placement is permanent, but we'll be adding stones and ground cover this spring. So these are the statistics for the slow-growing conifer garden. We had 58 additions. The diversity includes 31 unique species, 4 species of Abies, 7 species of Picea, 9 species of Pinus. The final numbers of this garden, they've increased the diversity of the entire arboretum. When Joy Arden, our GIS specialist, gave me the numbers, I was a little taken back and I didn't believe her, but it was a very small area with an incredible amount of diversity. That brings us to the conifer garden. And I guess you could consider the conifer garden our showcase conifer collection. It was designed by Lyndon Miller and Rhonda Brands in 2016. The garden showcases a unique diversity of conifers sourced from nurseries throughout the country, including Peace of Mind Nursery in Oregon and Half Moon Nursery in Pennsylvania. Rich Goodwin of Half Moon Nursery helped us on this job, and he continues to be a tremendous asset to the Arboretum. This is the before photo. This was called the Shrub Glade. And when I came to Bayard Cutting Arboretum, the conifer garden was already established, but it's such an important, valuable piece of real estate at the Arboretum. It's located right next to our manor house, and its borders our Great Lawn, which is an iconic area that stretches out to the Connecticut River, beautiful views. And I was just amazed that at one time there was such a wild, unkept area in this space. But it was one of Nelson's earlier projects. Like Nelson was mentioning in the Four Season Garden, holding on to certain elements that were originally there. There were a few specialty specimen plants that they dug out of here that remained. One of them being a large variegated liquid amber, which stands in the middle of the garden. The original design by Linda Miller and Rhonda Brands. Establishment of the hardscape. This photo reveals somewhat the important placement of the garden. If you look through, that's our Great Lawn, and that's the Connecticut River at the bottom. This is a good picture that pretty much captures the finished garden. It's a hard garden to capture in photos because there are numerous paths that wind in and out. But this is the foundation plants found on this path are pretty typical of what you'll see. There's a strong shrub and herbaceous layer in the garden, but as written in the mission of the garden, they all serve as placeholders until the conifers get larger, which is happening quickly. On your left, you'll see red twig dogwood Arctic fire, and a combination of geranium and Hakana cloa on the right. We have a tremendous collection of heather and heath in this garden. This is Calluna vulgaris Carnival, which is one of my newer favorites, and it's from Singing Tree Nursery in California. So there are a number of larger specimen conifers in this garden that really provide the bones of the garden. And I'm just gonna show you a few of them. Picea abies Froberg, Picea orientalis Skylands, Abies nordmandiana, Abies lasiocarpa or Arizonica glauca, Picea glauca pendula. And those are the Arctic fire dogwoods in the understory. And this is one of my favorites, Picea abies acrocona, one of my favorite cones. Nothing compares to it. Pinus strobus curly. This is a specimen that we got from Foxborough Nursery in Maryland. Pinus sylvestris Bennett compact. This was a gift from Conifer Kingdom 2 years ago. And a recent introduction from O'Brien Nursery in Connecticut, Cyadopolis verticillata Osorio's Gold. This was an introduction from Alfonso Osorio, a local favorite, late artist, garden designer from East Hampton, New York. And this is a true yellow pyramidal dwarf Cyadopolis. And this is the finished garden. The statistics of this garden, 209 conifers, 1.5 acres. The diversity consists of 21 genera, 56 species, and 133 cultivars. And I can assure you this will probably be different next week. We're constantly adding to the collection. This brings us to the Ed Rezak dwarf conifer collection. When I arrived at Bayard Cutting Arboretum, there was an empty bed at the bottom of the conifer garden, and this would later become the location of the Ed Rezak dwarf conifer garden. So as many of you probably know, Ed Rezak was a co-founder of the American Conifer Society and a local hobby conifer breeder from Long Island. This was his residence in Malvern, New York. And I remember when I was first visiting it with Nelson, we were looking for it and we were trying to figure it out in the directions. And Nelson told me, he said, "You'll know when we come to it." And you certainly did. This house stands out in a typical suburban neighborhood, probably less than 1/4 of an acre. That Acer monumentalis on the right-hand side is probably double the size of his home. So Maureen Rezak approached Bayard Cutting Arboretum after Ed passed away. She was moving to Florida and she wanted to donate Ed's collection to us. It was a tremendous project. We weren't really sure if we were up to it. We had a lot of other things going on. I had just started my position there. It was spring and Maureen wanted us to transplant soon. So it was done rapidly, and we relied on a lot of help from a lot of our friends. But the interpretation and the identification of this collection was quite a process because Ed didn't label anything. And for the most part, he left us a carousel of slides and an old video of him touring his garden. And we went through these slides and we viewed this video that Ed actually, I believe he made on his birthday. And it was a tour of his garden to show his family, but him talking intimately about each one of these plants. So we had these two, the slides and the video to use to identify and interpret everything. So in addition to horticultural know-how, a lot of detective work was used on this project. And I personally, I never knew Ed. I know Joy Arden, who's my coworker and GIS specialist. She didn't know Ed. I'm not sure if Nelson ever met him, but by the end of this project, we all felt like we knew Ed pretty intimately. And these were the slides that we went through for interpretation. I know this is a horrible picture, but I included it because I wanted to juxtapose the original plant next to what's in the garden now. And this is a Picea graft that Ed put together, which is in the Rezak garden now. And I had to include this story as well. So Ed's neighbor had a Norway maple, which seeded all over his garden, Acer platanoidis. And Ed would pot up these seedlings. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with curly lamppost. It's a cultivar that Ed selected. And the story is that 1 out of 1,000 of these Norway maples had the traits that made curly lamppost. We didn't get one of Ed's curly lampposts, but we did. Bruce Feller, a local conifer enthusiast, donated one to us last year. If you're not familiar with the plant, I really encourage looking it up. It's one of a kind, and another plant with a story and history to it. This was the process of transplanting. And this is the empty space at the bottom of the conifer garden that I was speaking of. And this is the finished garden. Design was very complicated in this situation. And once again, Rhonda Brands consulted with us. So I'm just gonna, once again, I could talk about each and every one of the plants in here, but I'm just gonna mention a few of them. So the majority of the collection was Camacypris obtusa. And one of my favorites was Cherriman. And why I like this plant so much, besides its like tight natural habit, it tends not to hold on to the dried growth as much as other obtusas. Besides all of that, I like the way Maureen, she had this cheery way. She referred to this plant as Mr. Chairman. And it was almost like she knew it on a personal level, which she did. Picea abies Rezak witch's broom. Cyadopetus verticillata piccolo. Ginkgo biloba. I have to mention, and Joy and Nelson can attest to this, wherever we looked in Ed's yard, there was a ginkgo or a maple seeding somewhere. He actually had ginkgo seeding in his gutters. And this was a stone that Maureen gave to us with a ginkgo rooted in it. And there were probably, I would say, no more than 6 inches of soil in that stone. We've been pruning it down hard to keep it as a standard. Pinus parviflora. This was an unknown cultivar, which we are still trying to identify. And Picea orientalis Tom Thumb's gold, which was grafted to Picea pungens. This is the graft that I showed you guys earlier. It was somewhat of a Frankenstein plant that we really couldn't figure out. And design-wise, some people were opposed to putting it in the collection, but it had such a big part of it was a big part of what Ed did, and I think it really kind of captured him, that we found a prominent spot for it in the collection. And this is Camacypris obtusa ciepitosa. And this was the oldest plant from Ed's collection. And he spoke about it in the video and in his slides, and it was given to him. It was a graft done somewhere in the Northwest, and it was given to Ed in 1944. And the amazing thing, in the slides that existed, the plant wasn't, it was pretty much about the same size as it is in this photo. And this is a recent photo of the completed collection. This sign we put together and we had made pretty much as soon as the garden was completed. In my opinion, it really completed the garden and it told the story of Ed. It was an article that was written by Rich Goodwin that was originally published in the ACS Quarterly. And this is the statistics for the Ed Rezak collection, 41 specimens. As you can see from these stats, there's an overwhelming number of obtusas. And, you know, looking through, Ed grew a lot of obtusas, and that's what we took from the garden. We looked for diversity, but I think the obtusas best told his story. And funny thing is, when we were putting this together, Nelson and I were like, how can we make a garden of primarily Chamaecyparis obtusa? And there's such subtle differences between Little Eddie and between Maureen and between all these different cultivars. But it really told the story of Ed, and to the discerning horticultural eye, it's certainly a learning garden as well. So I want to thank the entire BCA staff that makes the work that we do possible, particularly Nelson, who you guys met earlier, Joy Arden, our GIS specialist. Now, Joy, we had a limited amount of time, so Joy didn't join us in the presentation, but she was an integral part of putting this together. And speaking a little bit about being a reference garden, we plant all these plants every year. We aim for diversity. You know, we're busy trying to achieve that, but without Joy, our GIS specialist, we would never know what we plant. Joy makes it all possible. She puts the numbers together and makes it look wonderful on paper. And this presentation, for instance, we're often consumed with the work, so it's good to look back once in a while and actually see what we do on paper. And I want to thank Joy for making all that possible. And I want to thank Jessica O'Callahan as well. And like I said, she was our intern and she served on the project and is now an employee of ours. And most of all, I want to thank the ACS and Iseli Nursery for making this project possible. Thank you, guys.
Okay, bravo. Yay.
Wow, that was fantastic. I think people want to hear more about the garden, and we definitely all want to come and visit. It's just spectacular. But we have a lot of questions in the chat. So maybe, Kevin, you could put your camera on so folks could see you, unless you really don't want to. But
if you insist.
Oh, there he is. Yay.
So if you have questions, please write them in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'll just put them out there and you can decide who's going to answer what. How does that sound?
Good.
Okay. So the first question is, how many staff do you have and how are you funded?
Nelson?
Well, as any public garden, we never have enough staff, but in peak season, up to 20 people, year round, more like 8 or 10. We have maintenance staff, that manage the manor house, and garden staff. We're definitely on the light side, but I think the key to success at the Arboretum is the staff. And Kevin touched a little bit on Joy's contribution, but she's amazing. And she keeps us, she had me so scared with this presentation, I had to put the timer on. I thought she was going to yell at me. But I'm only kidding. But the staff is outrageous at this Arboretum, and they're the ones that make it such a great place. Okay.
And do you want to talk a little bit about your funding, or? Oh,
funding wise, one of the great things when Mrs. Cutting gave the Arboretum to the state, she endowed it. She gave 2 $500,000 gifts and created an endowment, which now has grown quite large. And so I have a board of trustees that manages the endowment, who gives us, a piece of that endowment each year. Mrs. Cutting was very, very smart because, and we never really got to talk about the deed of gift, but she created this endowment with the caveat that if the New York State does not manage the Arboretum as the trustees feel it should be, they have the right to take the endowment back and give it to another charity. So Mrs. Cutting was smart in the fact that she created this endowment, but that in fact, if the state didn't manage the property properly, the endowment would go away. So the endowment helps us. We fundraise each year. We do an annual giving. We charge for house tours. So we raise, good six-figure income on fundraising each year, and then the balance of it is paid by the state. So we probably between the trust and fundraising, we probably raise about 60% of our budget. State maybe 40%.
Great, thank you. Somebody asks, what zone are you in? And I'll just add something to that. Do you have problem with snow load on any of your conifers?
Well, we're zone 7.
Yeah.
And that we're constantly pushing the envelope on that one. Nelson touched on our oak collection, and we are growing a lot of oaks right now from more southern provenances. He mentioned even the southern live oak, which you would never think you could grow here. But it's called assisted migration. And in a place like Bayard Cutting Arboretum, we feel that we can kind of experiment with it and able to grow different plants in anticipation of the climate changing more rapidly.
We also have the moderating factor of the water, because we're on the Connecticut River, so that does help us stay a little bit warmer in the wintertime.
And the snow load, this year was the heaviest snow we got in a while. And to tell you the truth, we really didn't have too much of a problem. It was a heavy snow too. Some of our hollies that weren't pruned in a while, we found some damage, but for the most part, we were okay.
This question comes from Christy. It's interesting that you call it a slow growing conifer garden rather than a dwarf conifer collection. Can you discuss?
Sure, yeah. Well, a lot of these, I'm sure the conifer enthusiasts out there have visited conifer gardens that were once dwarf conifer gardens. So a lot of the conifers that we think of as dwarf conifers, they don't stay dwarfs forever. So this was, we did a lot of research in this garden, and Iseli was a big help on it. And even looking at our past gardens that we've put together, like the conifer garden, there were a lot of plants that exploded in that garden size-wise that we really didn't plan on, that now we're pruning very, very hard. So we thought slow-growing conifer garden would be more appropriate because some of these plants are going to get a lot bigger. The placement of them now, I think, is good and accurate, but it looks a little awkward now because some of them are smaller specimens. But we will be adding stones in the spring that I think will help it'll kind of break that up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, next question. Do you participate or plan to participate in the American Horticultural Society reciprocal admissions program?
Nelson?
I don't know if we can do it because we're a state, we're a state institution, so they don't really cross-pollinate with other, private industries. So that being said, if anybody's out there who wants to come, it's only $8, by the way, per car, but we'd be happy to work with you if you give us a call. We'll sneak you in the back gate.
Okay, let's see. Question, you don't seem to have any problems with deer.
Well, do you want to answer that, Nelson?
Well, the good news, there were so many great things done at the Arboretum when it went public. The state fenced the entire property. So the entire property has a 6-foot, which of course for deer isn't big enough, chain link fence around the property. But we do have deer here because the main gates are open. Our surrounding property of Paradise Island has a lot of breaches. So we do have deer here. In fact, 2 years ago, we fenced the entire CSA farm in with a deer fence. So we do have deer. It's not heavy pressure like in other places. And we're trying to mitigate it. You know, Kevin, with this year, we used some deer off and some deer repellents, scram, which had some effectiveness. So we have a minor deer problem here.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your labels and interpretation? And do you use any labels with barcodes, or are you thinking of doing that?
Joy?
Yeah, sure. So labeling and accession numbers are kind of what I focus on. We have labels for almost every single tree here within reason. We try to make it look tasteful. And they also correspond to our map. So you can type in the name of the tree and it'll come up right on our map. You can find that at our website. And on top of that, our trees have a small accession tag, a copper tag that has what the tree is as well as the accession number. And this really helps not only our patrons, but ourselves, because we can't, of course, remember what everything is. So I've found that patrons absolutely love it. And even the staff, they're like, this is great. Yeah, overall, it's been a wonderful part of my job, just being able to educate people and educate ourselves.
You know, we never had a GIS person in Joy, and we were lucky. Joy, we hired as an intern in 2015, and she's turned out to be just a superstar. And we were lucky enough that the board supported hiring Joy to do our labeling and inventory. And as Kevin said, Kevin and I are, you know, plantaholics really. And, you know, we'll just go buy. And then Joy has to sort it all out, figure out where it is and label it. And she's done an amazing job actually trying to keep this place together and actually keep a tally of how many plants we have. Pretty amazing, actually. So important.
She hates me during transplant season.
Oh my God.
Well, every arboretum does need their own GIS specialist. I'm very jealous of that.
Yeah, it's
That would be
super
great. Mapping is a big part of any arboretum, certainly. So we have a question. What are your thoughts of keeping dwarf conifers and/or maples in containers, but underground to contain the size and flexibility to relocate?
Well, when we plant a collection, I think it's thought out to the point where that plant's going to be there for a very long time. So that's actually that's never really been a thought of mine. How about you, Nelson?
No, I mean, we have plenty of plants in containers that need to get planted.
Yeah.
But no, I think Kevin's right. I mean, I think that the new conifer garden we put in, you can see the spacing takes into consideration how big everything's going to grow in the future. So we haven't considered that yet. So
They add another part to the question. What about if you're in a small urban area?
Well, I do know. I mean, Colby Feller at the Arsenal and the rooftop in New York City, he does a lot of work like that, and he's been successful.
Could you share more about the history of the earlier photos on PG pendula and the mature TC sargentii?
The Suja, that's very interesting because we just read, Kevin and I and Joy, Peter Deltradeci's I know I mispronounced it, article in Arnoldia about starch and weeping hemlock. And based on, we have a mixed view on that. He seems to think it came from Parsons Nursery. Our plant records seem to think it actually came from the Arnold Arboretum. So I'm not quite positive on that, but it's certainly one of the largest of its kind. Well, we've worked very, very hard on keeping it alive. One of the interesting things, hemlock woolly adelgid, of course, being the #1 problem, but one of the things actually we found with that particular plant was, believe it or not, the soil was actually too acidic. So we've been adding lime actually to try to get the pH back up, and I think the plant has responded quite well to it. So that plant's been doing very well for us, at least the last couple of years. So, well, there was a second part to the question.
Yeah, the PG pendula.
PG
I
pendula.
don't know what that means.
PG pendula. I'm not sure.
Do you pendula?
PG pendula.
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay. All right, maybe they'll elaborate a little bit.
Oh, wait, Picea glauca pendula.
Oh,
So it was a mistype.
okay, all right. So Kevin, you can answer. That's a great plant.
Yeah, so those are on the south side of the conifer garden.
Yeah.
And they add this very interesting kind of twisted aesthetic to that whole area. And who made that plant choice, Nelson? Was that?
That was just, as we were building the garden, we're looking for other weeping conifers. And I believe we got those from Ridge also.
Those are okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think that's the last question. Do you have any final remarks that you'd like to say about the Arboretum and your connection to ACS? We're certainly so excited that you're rejoined with ACS, and I hope that you guys put together. I think people are really interested in the stories that you mentioned, Kevin. So it would be great to see some articles in the Conifer Quarterly about that, or even another presentation.
Sure.
We would love to do it. And it, like I said earlier, it brings us a lot of pleasure to be able to share this with you guys.
Yeah, and we could share also what Kevin had talked about with the Ed Rezak garden, the fact that how we had to identify some of the plants. That video, his walkabout video, we probably could post up. I mean,
yeah, I was going to ask that. That would be amazing. I think
Yeah.
people would really like to see that. And
Yeah.
I know that Sarah Malone and who manages the ACS website is really interested in
Sure.
getting some history on the website. So that would be great.
We could share that. It's pretty fascinating. So good.
All right. Well, with that, everybody's putting in great comments saying
Yeah,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for the presentation.
Look forward to your visiting.
Yes. So, and with that, we're going to end. We wish you well and thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Debbie.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
us.
guys.
Hello.
See you tomorrow, Joey and Nelson.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.